Hello and welcome to the Enthusiasm Project. My name is Tom and it is a brand new year. So happy new year 2020. January also means that it's been 1 year that we've been doing this podcast, which is crazy. It's just it seems like a long time, but it went so fast. So excited. Hope your holidays were great. Hope your new year's off to a great start, whether you got resolutions or goals or nothing or everything, whatever it is. Hopefully it is going pretty well. Today, for our first show of the year, we're going to kind of continue the journey of season 2, which is the process of building a business, handling revenue, all that kind of stuff. And now that it is the new year, we kind of have the opportunity to do some cool new stuff. The biggest of which is that Heather and I can now officially form our LLC, which we talked about in a few previous episodes. And basically that's just kind of the smarter way of handling revenue, especially from multiple sources. And it's just kind of the cleanest, most legitimate way, and also makes it easier for other people to do business with you, which is something that I'm learning is kind of important. Is it's not just about being good at what you do or having something valuable to offer, but it's of course just being ready to like easily fit into an existing ecosystem that has already been established. So the reason we didn't want to form our LLC at the end of 2019 is just because, at least in California, you have to pay an $800 a year like registration fee. And if you form in the last few months of the year, especially last quarter, basically you'll end up paying the fee for that year. And then as soon as the new year starts, you got to pay it again. So within a few months, you could find yourself paying $1,600 instead of just the $800. And so we decided it would be smarter to wait until the new year just to save a bit of money, because that's a good thing. $800 is kind of a lot of money. It seems like a good deal for, being able to form an entire LLC, but that's still like, it's not just a bunch. I don't have a bunch of extra $800 piles of money lying around just ready to go. So I'm excited to get that going and feel concrete. I'm somebody who works really well when like plans are in motion. Like it's one thing for me to have an idea, but as soon as you like register that web URL, then it feels just a little more real and concrete, even if there's nothing there. And I know that's kind of silly, or it can seem kind of silly, but I just know for me, that has always been kind of a motivating factor, something that just sort of helps. And today, not talking so much about the LLC, but talking about something that if you're anyone who creates anything for online whatevers, which is a very specific group of people, there's something you might be excited about, but something you're also probably tired about hearing, which is building your brand and building the brand and build your brand. But that's what we're going to talk about today, because is this good advice? Is this bad advice? And where does it fit in? I have spent the last several weeks just sort of not necessarily overhauling, but re-examining and fine-tuning my quote-unquote brand. And I've learned a lot from that, and I want to share that with you. And I think that might be helpful to anyone else who's doing the same thing, or maybe doesn't even realize that it's something to do. So first of all, I'm just going to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Well, two elephants in the room. The first is that I'm not a professional, so I'm figuring it out as I go very, very much. The second is that this is a topic that has been done kind of to death, building a brand and whatever, but it's one of those things that people keep coming back to because it is kind of important. It's the same thing with my students in the classroom. They want to it's made me feel great that this school year I've gotten the question more than I ever have before of like, how do I get better at filming? How do I get better at editing? And it makes me really happy that like these kids want to get better at these things. But the answer I tell them is like, honestly, it's just practice. And they're usually not super excited for that. They want like I don't know what the quicker way would be, but they want that quicker way. And it doesn't exist. It just takes practice. And the same thing is sort of true with building your brand, not so much in the way of practice, although that is part of it, but more so in that even though we hear it and it's not always like the most like, it's not necessarily like the biggest thing that you want to jump in and do. it is pretty crucial because, I mean, the truth is, which I've said many times before, it all comes down to you being in charge of your own narrative, right? So if somebody, especially in 2020, goes online and Googles your name, your organization, whatever, what are they going to find? And is it going to actually reflect you, or is it going to reflect something else? You know, sometimes maybe it's just going to, other people, other results, other whatevers will pop up. But, you know, is somebody going to see the thing you want them to see? Or are they going to find some weird, like, I don't know, like Blogspot page from 2004 that you have a bunch of like edgelord ideals you were sharing with the world that maybe like aren't the thing you want to share anymore? I don't know. And so it's important to kind of be in charge of that. And just also the same thing, if you have multiple channels, if you've got, you know, a website and some social media and a storefront or whatever, it'd be nice beyond the name if those things are clearly related to one another. And that's kind of where the branding comes in. It goes, you know, far beyond just the logo or a slogan or whatever. And the thing with branding, and there's a lot of things with branding, but what I have learned kind of working in that world in one way or another for a long time, but I mean, genuinely as part of my job for the past 6 or 7 years, branding is crucial because it's a huge part of communication. But so often, and where so many people go wrong, is that there's nothing behind their brand. They design a logo, and that's kind of the end of it. And that's not good branding. Like, even if it looks great, and now even with sites like Fiverr and stuff like that, people will just post a thing that's like, I need a logo with this, and then they pay a few dollars and they get a result back, and that's like, now they have branding, which is not necessarily the case. I always think of, sometimes you go to like these hipster, super gentrified restaurants, which, like, you know, can sometimes be amazing, but a lot of times it's like the food is sort of average, but you go there and, like, you know, everything is super branded. There's cool menus. There's great theme and decor. There's like a philosophy. Everyone's wearing, you know, whatever specific trendy gear they're wearing in their restaurant and serving up their recipes. And if you strip all that away, all that branding away, the food sometimes is just sort of like, this is just a burger and fries. Like, I know you served it to me in a paper cone or whatever, but like, it's not really that much better than any other burgers and fries I would get. And that's not a great thing. It does kind of like show you the power of branding, that, you know, you can be bought in with something like that, but there should be something behind the brand, and the brand should be your secret weapon of communicating that thing. Heather and I were just talking today. We've recently gotten into this love affair with IHOP, and this podcast is not sponsored by IHOP, but if they would like to, I hop on it. Anyway, we have been recently just like, I don't know, we just ended up at IHOP a while ago, and we're like, this like super good. Like, the food was really good, and like the variety of the menu was great. And we're like, why don't we come here more often? This is delicious. This tastes fantastic. You know, they're super friendly, super accommodating. If you ask, can I have this instead of that or whatever? And now that we've gone to, like, in the past month or two, you know, several different IHOP locations, that experience has been pretty consistent throughout. And, you know, we were telling Heather's family over the weekend, like, we should go to IHOP. And their first reaction was like, okay, sure. And it kind of sucks because, you know, not that I'm out to like defend some giant corporation or whatever, but, you know, IHOP still exists in communities that when the restaurant succeeds, the community succeeds. And more importantly, it's like, it's actually a good product, but it just sort of has that giant chain restaurant feel to it, that's what people associate it with. And we were saying, if this was just called like Joey's Pancake House and it had the exact same menu, the line would be out the door like, oh my God, you can get cupcake pancakes, you can get chocolate pancakes, they have waffles, they have these big old burgers, like, this is the craziest restaurant in the world, it's amazing. But because it's IHOP, honestly, the line's still kind of out the door sometimes, but it sort of has that connotation or whatever of just sort of being like, it's like Denny's, but more pancake based. And that to me kind of goes, that's sort of like what we're talking about with branding. It's having a quality product, but then also having the branding to go along with it. And so you don't want to be that overpriced restaurant with, what is the thing? The like fancy mayo that they put on everything. Aioli. Like, oh my God, it's $8 extra for aioli. Anyway, kind of went on a journey there. But for me, just personally, branding is just for whatever reason, something I've always been interested in just as a kid. Maybe you did this too, where you watched movies and you saw the studio logos, or you open up like logos for some reason were just in my mind. I was always interested in like, why the Kmart logo in our town looked different than the, Thrifty logo, than the Stater Brothers logo, or just whatever other stores I visited a lot as a kid. And it just kind of became interesting. And I sort of just started noticing like, like every time you go somewhere, they have a certain feel, like certain colors are associated with certain brands and certain styles and language, and just sort of everything helps tell that story. And where it comes back to you being in charge of your personal narrative is, if you're not telling your story, that either means somebody else is going to tell it for you or nobody's going to tell it. And you want to be the one in charge of putting that stuff out there and making sure it's exactly what you want it to be. And then for me, later on in high school, my friends and I had a quote unquote band, which is like, we recorded songs which were not good, and we'd like never played shows or anything, but we played music together like every single weekend. There wasn't, it wasn't a great band, but it was a really fun project and a really cool thing to do. And this was in like the early 2000s, 2001, 2002. And one of the first things we did was start a website. And that was kind of like my undertaking. Like everyone else was really into it. We were, huge fans of the Aquabats, who had their website, which was like very goofy and, branded for them, but also like kind of a mess. But every once in a while, they'd post these news updates that were not just news updates. They were like almost like stories. Like it was very much in the universe and the language and the jokes. And every time they'd mention something, there'd be a link you click and it'd take you to like a funny picture or a weird URL or whatever. And so we kind of started doing that. And we went through all these different website designs. And then, like Web 2.0 stuff started coming out and moving from HTML to CSS. And I just started learning all these skills, building this kind of like ostensibly pointless website, which, it had a little counter at the bottom like websites used to have, and like a guest book you could sign and all that. And it's not like the counter was spinning so fast you couldn't keep track of it. It'd be like, a couple hits a day, maybe a couple a week. But it was such good foundation building for me, and just figuring that stuff out, kind of learning, what to do, what doesn't work, figured out some little like, web design hacks that were amazing that I still use today, and other ones that I was like, I can't believe I did that. That was like terrible. But anyway, the point is, we kept doing branding, and I was using Microsoft Paint to like do our logos and things, and every title of every page, kind of like, my YouTube videos and stuff now, had hand-drawn like titles and lettering that I would do in Microsoft Paint. Of course, they were all pixelated and jagged because that's how that program worked. Eventually, I got a copy of Photoshop and was able to like, there were just gradients everywhere and like dissolve layers and things like that. And I was working at a TV station at the time. This was in high school, and we were using Photoshop to design like the graphics for the news every night, like the shoulder squeezes that go over the anchor's shoulders. And I just remember like, God, this program is so incredibly powerful, and all this, it's so easy to make stuff look good. And I just got kind of addicted to that. And so I would just constantly refresh our website with, color schemes and logos and, all this stuff. And then, we started other, websites, and I started like an Aquabats fan site at one point. So I was trying to like mimic Aquabats branding, but, as a fan site where clearly you're not trying to be the official thing. You're trying to be like, it was just sort of, it was interesting. I didn't think of it as like exercise or practice or anything, but it was just kind of like really good reps that I had no idea why I was doing them. But I'm really glad that I did, because then later on, like a decade later, when I started teaching digital media, the digital media program I joined was a complete mess. And there were 2 teachers. The program had been there for like 7 or 8 years. I think they had like, I don't know, half a dozen websites just kind of littering the internet. Everything had a different name. Everything had a different logo, a different style. There was just no consistency. It was just like chaos. And when I came in as a new teacher and started bringing in some new classes and kind of a new direction to my side of the program, we decided that this is a good time to rebrand our entire program. And so during one summer break, we came up with a new logo. We came up with we kind of cleaned up our website URLs, where basically you just had the one main website. And then from there, you could go to each of the two pathways within our program, because there was my pathway and a second pathway. And that was kind of it. And, there was social media channels and stuff like that, but everything was very organized and very, it made a lot more sense. It looked a lot better. And then we just started, we made a very simple logo and just sort of started plastering it everywhere. It was all over the website stuff, but then we had stickers and we had merch and t-shirts and stuff for the students to wear. And it seemed sort of silly. It's a high school program. Why are you going all crazy with merch and branding? But the important thing was to make it visible in the community, make it visible on campus, so that it was a thing that was a part of the campus. Just the same way football players wear their football jerseys, our students were wearing, their t-shirts and their hoodies and stuff like that. And then that kind of went further into the community and down to the middle school, down to the elementary school. So it got to the point where kids would come in and they would join our program, having seen that logo for years. And, they saw it on their older siblings, clothes, or they just saw it in the community or whatever. And when it came time to sign up for their class at high school, and we put that logo on the registration forms, it just pulled those kids right into the program because that branding was so strong. And it was shocking how powerful that was and how much better it made all of our outreach and our presentations. And it really helped connect the kids to the program in a really effective way. The quality of the curriculum didn't change. It was just the way we were framing everything that changed. And the crazy part is, around that time, I also started doing a bunch of outreach with other teachers and other programs. We do presentations and open houses and those kinds of things. And we did a lot of presentations on branding and how to rebrand, and especially within the educational world, how to do that. And it was crazy because so many teachers don't even think about it. And I understand it might not make sense if you were just an English teacher or a math teacher. And I don't mean just an English teacher, but I mean where you're teaching a subject that is sort of more traditional, I guess, for lack of a better term. And you're not necessarily in charge of a larger pathway. Even within that, I would argue that your school's department is unique, your class, your series of classes, whatever you do. I would argue that every teacher, even a third grade teacher, why are you doing branding with your students? Using something that I think teachers do it without maybe even realizing it, makes your students feel included and a part of something and connected to something in a very visceral way is really important. But if there are any teachers doing pathways and special programs, it's huge, because those programs are so competitive to recruit students, to keep students, to connect students with the school in a way that's going to keep them there, not just for one semester or 1 year, but for multiple years, for their whole high school experience, even their whole time being there. And that, I think, is really where, at least in that context, the power of branding was just huge. And then to kind of go from that, it also protected us, because one of the reasons, the teacher that I worked with in my old program, he had gotten a pink slip early in his career, not for any performance related things, but just when budgets were really bad. I got one my first year teaching too. And it's just basically where hey, we have no money, especially when the Great Recession happened. They were just handing hundreds of these out every year, and you get a pink slip, and sometimes they would take it away at the end of the year. Other times you would actually lose your job. Luckily, when I got mine, they took the pink slip back at the end of the year, so I got to keep my job. But it sucks. That's a terrible place to be. It's awful. And one of the things my co-teacher said was, after that, he wanted to do everything he could to make himself valuable, and clearly valuable. And so he started a website for his program. That's kind of where their initial branding came from, because it was just all about the website not only has all the info, but it's it's got a news page, like a blog almost, where it's just sort of, this is everything that's happening. These are all our accomplishments. It basically became a portfolio. And then I learned, that would be important for my program to have too. So when people say, what do you do? It's hard to answer that in a few questions. But if you go to this website, there's just a flood of what we do. And that became hugely valuable. And so, as I mentioned earlier, that lets you be in charge of your narrative. And that in a professional setting was really powerful to me. And then a few years later, when I got the chance to start my own program, one of the first things, which seems sort of silly, was I spent so much time on branding this brand new program, coming up with the logo and the name and the website. So on day one, it was all there because for me, I wasn't taking over a program this time. I was starting one from scratch. So the students coming into it, the school itself, none of that existed before. And I needed to bring it there. And we just happened to be at a time where the school was opening up a new campus. It had been rebuilt. Now we had a new campus. And I knew that that meant there was some kind of chaos. You know, there's a lot of movement, a lot of shuffling. And I just kind of wanted, by the time the dust settled, it was just like, oh yeah, that program's always been here, right? And that it really worked. Like it completely worked, that plan. And it was also because like we had no equipment starting out. Literally, there's a digital media pathway with a few really old computers and no cameras was where it began. And, you know, it makes me proud of where it is now. But for me, you know, the first few days of school or the first few weeks, even when we're just kind of getting started and figuring out what the classes are and all that kind of stuff, it was more about just communicating what this is and what these students are a part of that was important to me. And so part of that was like, I mean, I spent that whole summer getting business cards printed up, getting posters printed up, building the website, you know, of course, designing the curriculum, but then, you know, creating the syllabus that has the logo on it. So as soon as they walked in to that room, as soon as they saw me, I got, you know, polo shirts printed up so I could wear that program. It was like they were walking into something that already existed. And it wasn't really smoke and mirrors because even though the program was new, I knew the potential that it had. And so I knew what was going to be there. But I needed to make that a real thing so that other people would be willing to buy into it and commit to it for, you know, such a long period of time and put so much effort and then eventually money behind it. So all that is to say, even though we hear so much about the power of branding and build your brand and all those kind of things, I can attest in multiple ways that is hugely, hugely important in just so many capacities. Before we left on winter break, my school had a career day, which they do like every year. And every teacher is just, it's sort of strange because you're just like required, like find a speaker. And you're like, okay, cool. I have to find someone to take a day off in the middle of the week and give the same presentation 6 times to hundreds of high school kids for free. It's a very big ask. Heather was my career day speaker last year, and she's great because her stuff is so connected to what we do. And she's, you know, helped me build the program anyway. But this year, I knew it would be easy to ask her to do it again. I knew the kids would love to hear from her again. But I wanted to kind of step out a little bit. And so I asked Heather's brother to come and be a career day speaker because he has all kinds of experience, you know, not only from struggling to find direction in high school himself and in college, but then, you know, jumping in his career from personal things to working with companies, everything from starting his own business to working with like Disney Imagineering and, you know, film studios and clients and just sort of the whole thing in the world of graphic design, animation. And so he came and gave this presentation repeatedly telling his story. And of course, because he has, I think I would say, a finer attention to detail than I do, and I've always held myself at a pretty high standard of somebody who pays attention to the finer details. You know, his whole presentation looked great. The way he presented it, the way he told the story, the way he like kind of, you know, took all these years of, you know, kind of chaos and struggle and success and just crafted them into a narrative that made sense, especially for teenagers who don't necessarily have that life experience. I thought it was brilliant. And you know, of course, the whole thing looked great and was branded really well. And one of my students at the end of one of the presentations was just like, oh, do you have, you know, like how important is it? Or maybe I even asked this question. I think I asked, how important is it to have a website, like a personal website? And he said that in his industry, you know, that's your portfolio. That's hugely important. That's kind of everything. And then fortunately, one of my students asked, well, can we see your website? And just kind of put him on the spot. And because he's a great team player, he put his website up on screen, and of course, it was amazing, you know. And he went into it was actually great. I wish I would have like thought to have him share that in every presentation because it really showed the contrast between, hey, here's the media I do work with clients and companies and things, but here's what it looks like when it's just me and when I'm in charge of it. This is my personal logo. This is my personal style. This is how I'm sharing the work. He has such a diverse portfolio of work. Seeing how it was all integrated into one place that actually made sense and was cohesive was just, I loved it. I lost my mind. And so immediately seeing that, I was just like, I need to do more with my website and my stuff. And, I feel like with my YouTube channel things, I've gotten ahead of the whatever you want to call it, ahead of the need in some areas, but I've also just been in survival mode in other areas. It's like, a YouTube banner, for example, which is hugely important. I did a whole video on them. It was something when I first started my channel, I was like, who cares? Literally, my first YouTube banner was a very pixelated design that I had made in like 2011, and I started the channel in 2017. And when I uploaded it, it looked terrible, but I was like, who cares? Like, people see the videos are good. No one's going to look at that. It doesn't matter. And, when we started doing critiques, that was one of the first things that just got torn apart was like, your banner, what is this? Like, it does not match the quality of what we're seeing. And I was like, oh my God, people are actually paying attention to this and I need to change it. But just, tightening the whole thing up, I thought was really important. And so I spent a ton of time over the winter holiday break just sort of redoing everything. And this has been really fun because for me, it has given me such an incredible sense of direction. So I started, especially in terms of like trying to make this a more cohesive, coherent business, I started just by kind of fixing some logos and some design. So, like there were certain things that I had been using that were just sort of low resolution because maybe they weren't intended. I created a logo for something like a business card and now I was using it on the website and it wasn't the right resolution. So it was looking, it was looking a little pixelated and blurry or whatever, things like that. I kind of went through and just cleaned all of that up. And then I looked at the website as a whole and was just sort of like, what do I need? This needs to be more than just a landing page. Like it needs to communicate things about me. It needs to, eventually I'd love for it to be an actual resource of some kind for people, but I'm not there yet. But at least there's a foundation of you can go there. There's, it's not overwhelming. It's very clean design, but there's content. So, you go to the homepage, you go to the about section, news, media, contact, whatever the sections all are. And you can actually glean information from them. And it's interesting and it's visual. And I made sure to go in and redo some of the headers so that everything's in my own handwriting. And then the body copy is in text. So it kind of just matches. If you see one of my YouTube videos and then you go to the channel and you see the banner and the thumbnails, it all makes sense. And then if you go to the social media, it all makes sense. And if you go to the website, it all makes sense. And it's very clearly from the same person. You could look at all of those different outlets at once and know that they all belong to the same person. And that was kind of my goal, in addition to just making everything look, as good as I possibly could. And so I went a little crazy kind of redoing that. And I got new business cards and new stickers and stuff like that basically the same thing I would do with my high school media program. Like, what is the stuff you need to make this abstract digital idea a concrete thing that exists in the world, in people's minds, in people's lives? And it was really like, I guess I didn't realize how much it had been bothering me that those things weren't all there in the past, because now that they are there, as soon as I finished it, I just felt like such a huge relief. It's one of those things that then in a few months you go back and you want to change it or fix it or polish it up. And I can't believe this looked good. Now this. But, for now, I'm really, really, really happy with everything. But one of the key components was sort of figuring out that slogan. And I mentioned Eric Wen on a previous podcast, and I've been talking with him a lot more. And we've sort of just been like YouTube strategizing together and giving each other feedback. And it's been great. And he was the person who initially said, like a month or two ago, that when it comes to YouTube channels that he watches and enjoys, usually it comes down to a feeling. And I kind of thought about that and I agreed. It's not so much like, it is the content. Of course, I want to know more about something. I want to learn how to do something or experience something or be entertained or whatever. But it is kind of a feeling like, especially the stuff that I like, camera reviews and tech things and things like that. Like, you can get that information from a million sources. You can get it from just a written text post, but there's something about the way certain people explore those topics and explain it that is just like very like tactile and real, and there's just something about it that makes me want to see more and to just know more and enjoy more of that. And what Eric had said was that, when he was watching some of my videos, he had that feeling and he couldn't put it into words, but it was after watching 4 or 5 videos, like he knew the feeling that was there of why he wanted to keep watching more. And so what is the main point? And the slogan on my channel was make a video, make an impact, which I came up with last summer after doing like a consult for the channel. And I was like, yeah, video is really powerful and people learn. I want to help people make better videos. I'm comfortable niching down into the area of video production. And I feel like that's going to help you make an impact on the world. And it was a nice little tie-in since my digital media program is called Impact. It was sort of like a little Easter egg wink kind of thing. But I also like didn't like it. It just sort of felt a little too... It's not that I don't know. It just, something felt off. I don't know how to describe what felt off. It just felt off a little bit. And I've been thinking for months of like, what would be a better slogan, which sounds silly, but it is one of those things like, okay, somebody comes here. What is it? What do you do? Like what is this? And that was a problem I had on my old business cards for the channel. It would say the Enthusiasm Project. And on the back, it said work hard, be kind, have fun, because those are some core values I believe in. And, it's not like I'm trying, at the time, was trying to like really be a business, but sometimes people would want contact info. I'd hand them the card and they would be confused. Like, what is this? What do you do? There's no information here about what this actually is. There's a YouTube URL, there's some contact info, but what is the Enthusiasm Project? Work hard, be kind, have fun. Like what? Okay. And what do I do with this? And so I needed something that was a little more clear. And I have been thinking about it. And finally one day I was just like walking around the house and I was like, I don't know what it should be. I just want to help people level up their videos. That's all I want to do. What could I say that's just going to help people know that I want to help them level up their videos? And I was like, oh, that's perfect. And Heather and I had been, we've been playing a lot of video games over break, and like the idea of leveling up is just, it's just a cool thing. Like, you sort of work hard, you gain experience, and then you level up. It's very fun. It's very positive, but specifically like, leveling up your video. That's what my videos help you do. Like, hopefully they're fun and entertaining and there's a part of personality that people like, but really like, I want you to leave a video being better off than you were in terms of video production. Like, I'm not going to teach you chemistry. I'm not going to teach you, how to build a birdhouse or anything probably, but I can definitely teach you how to do better audio. I can definitely talk to you about camera gear. I can definitely talk to you about, how to combine all this stuff and some strategies and that kind of thing to help you literally level up your videos, the quality, the content, the whole deal. And that just kind of snapped into focus, and I really liked it. And that's what it just felt, it was perfect for me because it was clear, but it was obvious, but it was still really fun. It wasn't just kind of like dry or vanilla. There's something about it that I just loved, and I could pick out visual ways of like communicating it and branding it. And I could even hear little sound effects popping up, like gamified sound effects. I was like, oh, there's so much I could do with this in the future. And as superficial as it sounds and as silly as it seems, as soon as that clicked, that's when everything else for the branding fell into place. And that's what really like gave me the steam to just put in all these hours doing everything else, the website and new banners and new thises and new that's and ordering new, printable materials and all that kind of stuff. Was just like, everything is clear now. Like the gears kind of clicked into place, everything snapped into focus, and now there was a direction to go in. And it was, I don't have a strategy for achieving that other than that just letting it churn. I thought about it constantly. I talked about it with people a lot, like what is, with Heather, with Eric, with, just other people I know really well, people I didn't know that well, like online and Facebook groups and stuff, just to kind of get some of that feedback and sort of just let it churn. And eventually it just clicked. But even though I don't have a secret, I wish I knew how to just get to that clicking point sooner. I don't have that other than just let it keep churning in your brain and eventually it'll happen. But having it happen is huge because that then lets you see what you're doing through the eyes of your customer, your viewer, your client, the world, whatever your audience is. And then that helps you make these decisions. It just makes all the decisions much easier because now you know what this brand is. And now I feel much more confident in sharing all those things. Like before, I had a website URL and I was happy about it, but I was kind of like, it's fine if you don't go to the website. And now it's like, no, I'm really proud of it. Like, you should go check that out. You should go check this out. There's a podcast. There's a whole thing. I'm proud of all of it. And it's all part of the same brand. And that just makes me feel so much more confident and so much more, comfortable going forward in the future because it's that consistency and it gives whoever, no matter which outlet they connect with me through, it's going to give a consistent feeling. And it just, again, it goes back to making it something that's concrete. And that's what I want to create, is something that's a real thing. And I feel like it's starting to happen and it makes me really, really excited. It almost reminds me of like a concert experience. Especially for me as a kid, like in high school, going to my first concerts, like we'll go back to the Aquabats. I absolutely love them. I listened to them constantly. I, looked through their CD booklets all the time, looked at their website all the time. But out in the rest of the world, that I didn't there were no other fans that I knew regularly, and they didn't have a TV show or anything at the time, and YouTube didn't exist yet. So like access to their world was not easy to come by. And the first, especially the first couple times I saw them in concert, I just remember that feeling of like getting somewhere and suddenly like the people just look a little different. There's t-shirts with logos that I recognize and I'm like, this is all part of it. There's people in costumes that I recognize the costumes. I'm like, oh, okay. And then you start, you get to the venue and you start to see the merch and you're like, oh my gosh, like here's that thing. And you start to hear some of the just like, I don't know what it would be called, but the music that's playing before things start. And it's like, oh, like it's just this thing that had been sort of an abstract, very personal idea to me was now like this thing that existed in the real world. And there were visuals and there were sounds and there were, there was a whole experience emerging. And then of course the actual band comes out like in the flesh and they're right there playing music and it's loud and it's amazing. And there's other people there and it's a whole shared experience. But that thing of all those elements that make it concrete, the difference between that versus just like a group of friends playing in a bedroom or whatever is a lot of it is building and sharing that brand, which is truly, 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 as much as it might be like over given advice, one of the most important and powerful things you can do I think if you're anybody, but especially if you're somebody who's creating anything online or putting anything out into the world, having that clear brand, hugely important. And it's a struggle, but I think that it's a struggle to really work through and not just work to the surface level. Anyone can come up with a name or a logo, but kind of going deeper than that. And that was one of the things Eric and I talked about recently together was it's not so much that the people seeing your work need to know the core of what you're doing, but you need to have gone, 10 levels deep with why things are the way they are, what you're doing, how it all ties together. It's not necessarily that you have to tell them those 10 levels every time, but if you have that clarity and that depth in what you're doing, it is going to resonate in a way that creates that feeling for people that whether they can articulate it or not is the thing that's going to connect them to you and make them want to come back and keep them attached. So even if it takes extra time, it's so worth, and it's just a good personal reflective experience to like build your brand, reflect on it. What do you want to communicate? Modify it. It's going to make you feel good and proud and accomplished in a way that not a lot of things can. So that is my soapbox for this week, is all about building the brand. Of course, I would definitely love to hear you talk about, any input that you have or anything else. As I mentioned in the last podcast, I didn't know that Anchor lets you leave voice messages for people, and that's amazing, regardless of whatever app you're listening to this podcast on. If you go to anchor.fm/enthusiasm, there's a button there that says leave a message, and you can just leave a voice message, and then I can incorporate it into a future podcast. I did that last time. It was super fun. I would definitely love to hear a message. But of course, before we can totally go, it's kind of important to get to gear of the week. So this is one of my favorite parts of the show because it's where I can just unapologetically just nerd out about gear. And what I've been doing lately is I try to be really practical about upgrading gear. And, I talk about a lot of equipment on my channel, but it doesn't mean that I'm buying all of those things. Most of the stuff, especially comparisons and reviews, are borrowed. And so it's not me spending my money. I'm very, very thrifty and decisive when I want to spend my money on something. But what I've been doing lately is really kind of looking at my setup and looking for pain points and friction points where I can reduce those to improve things. So, for example, I updated a light. I talked about that last time. That's been a huge difference. The most recent thing that I did is I've been using just sort of a traditional camera slider since about 2013. It's great. It's probably the best just manual slider you could get, even though, it's not crazy expensive or anything. But I use that thing in every video. And lately, it's been so frustrating. I just don't know if it's me or what, but it feels like it's harder and harder to get a smooth shot. And so I'm redoing my shots, 4 or 5 times to try to get a nice smooth slide. And then if I want to do something else, have the camera tilt or whatever, now I'm trying to do multiple things at once and make them all smooth and even. And oh my gosh, it's just really hard to do. So finally, there was a great sale at B&H over the holidays. I got the Edelkrone, I think it's the Slider 1 Pro is what it's called, this little motorized slider. It's amazing. It lets you have to use an app. You can, of course, control it manually if you need to, but there's an app on your phone. The app works great so far. You can set all different points, speed, ease in, ease out, and it just... I can't believe that I didn't have a motorized slider. Everything just looks so much better using it, and I love it. That's definitely my pick for gear of the week. It does have also a panning head, a motorized panning head you can put on it. I don't have that because it costs just as much as the slider itself. I'd love to get that at some point though, because then you can have your camera automatically move and pan and tilt, and that lets you do crazy effect shots too, because you're able to duplicate the exact same movement, which it's just not something that's really possible to do when using a manual slider. So this was a little bit pricey, but I think it came out to, I don't know what the normal price of this thing is. I think it was $300, which is not bad in the world of motorized sliders. And it was a B&H deal of the day. Oh man, it's great. It's definitely worth the higher price. And it just takes the Canon batteries that my cameras take. So I don't know why they made that choice, but I love it. Because I have a whole set of those batteries. Both my cameras take those LP E6 batteries, the same kind of battery. The slider takes them, so I can just use the same battery system, the same charger for all these devices. It is awesome. So if you're watching videos lately, there's always slider shots in them, but maybe you notice they're a little bit smoother and a little bit, just looks a little bit better. And that's all because of that Edelkrone slider, which I'm totally in love with right now. So that about wraps up the show for today. Please feel free to reach out. Check out the website, enthusiasmproject.com. Send me an email, tom@enthusiasmproject.com. Check out the YouTube channel, @SodarnTom, Twitter, Instagram. However you want to reach out, I love hearing from people. And of course, anchor.fm/enthusiasm. Leave a voice message. I'd love to have you be a part of a future episode of this podcast. And until then, I never know how to end these. Gosh, this is the next part of my branding. I need to find an outro. It's just applause and I can't fix it. This is a nightmare.